So in chapter six, we learned about the atmosphere and how that affects the oceans. Um, and then the first thing that I learned was that there's actually an unequal distribution of sunlight, which causes more water vapor to be present in the areas where the sunlight's more intense, which actually makes sense because there's more, I guess, evaporation happening in the oceans in those areas. I also learned that changes in season creates a shift in high and low pressures, and that's actually what determines which direction the wind blows. So in the summer, there's a higher pressure, which causes the wind to blow north typically, and then that changes in the winter when uh, there's low pressure, and the wind's actually going to blow south during that time. I learned that only 12% of icebergs are actually visible above the sea's surface, and the other 88% are below. Um, so, the question that I actually had along with that was, is that because the seawater is like protecting the ice below the surface, which causes, I guess, like keeps it safe while the ice above the surface is melted by the sun? Um, I thought it was interesting that mountains deflect wind upwards, and then that rising air on the windward side of the mountain causes heavier precipitation. Um, and then on the other side of the mountain, the descending air usually accounts for less precipitation and a drier climate. Um, I found it interesting that uh, ocean currents transfer heat downward in the summer and upwards in the winter. That's uh, kind of makes sense why there is more heat in the summer. It just never really occurred to me that way. I learned that typhoons, cyclones, and hurricanes are all basically the same thing, just have different names depending on where they actually form. I kind of thought they were all different. Um, Something I wanted to learn more about, since there's already a hole in the ozone layer. I was wondering what else like can cause these issues, and like what exactly could, I guess, make that hole worse, like how it grows and how another could possibly be formed. I found the greenhouse effect kind of interesting, the way it changes with no human interaction. I didn't know that before reading this chapter. um, a couple things I'd like to learn more about too are trade winds. After reading the chapter, there are some other things that I guess I'd want to learn about those. I'd also like to learn more about how night and day affects like onshore and offshore breezes, um, because they actually shift to the opposite with the time of the day. So, questions that I had along with that is like what happens in between those 2 points when the pressure is changing. So, when it's not completely one way or the other, and at what point does the wind like totally shift the opposite way? And then my final question was that if a hurricane was formed south of the equator and it's moving northward, or vice versa, if it formed north and moved south, what would happen to it? Does it just lose all of its power and kind of die off? And how quickly does that occur? And also, um, how close to the equator would a hurricane be able to get before it actually, I guess, um, dies off, I guess? because it said that hurricanes are unable to form at the equator, but I wasn't sure if it was already um, kind of started somewhere else, if it would be able to continue on there or if it would just stop. Yep.